Well, last night, a KARE 11 investigation exposed a failure to enforce firearm safety laws designed to protect victims of domestic violence. Tonight, we look at what more can be done to get guns away from dangerous abusers. Here's A.J. Legault with his continuing investigation, A Failure to Check.
I know this bill will not save every life.
It's 2014 at the state capitol. Lawmakers pass important new domestic violence firearm legislation.
But this is an action that I believe will save lives.
It's backed by two of Minnesota's most pro-gun rights legislators.
We put as much protection as we did with gun owners as we possibly could, and also protect a woman or a man from getting shot and killed.
The Domestic Violence Firearm Act mandates, after an order of protection, an OFP, civil hearing where a judge determines domestic abuse has occurred, the accused abuser has 3 days to either transfer firearms to someone else or to police for as long as that order is in effect. What's more, the law requires the abuser to file an affidavit with the court telling where the gun went. But 3.5 years after Minnesota passed that life-saving domestic violence gun transfer law, KARE 11's investigation found it's rarely enforced.
There's no secret at all that he owns a gun.
A judge gave Desiree Nelson an order for protection after she detailed multiple gun-related threats from an abusive ex. But court records show he never filed the required gun transfer affidavit.
Then they tell him to surrender it, and then no one even checked.
She's right. KARE 11's investigation discovered Minnesota courts rarely follow through to ensure the firearm transfer order is obeyed. Our analysis of court data for 2016 found statewide there were nearly 3,000 cases, and 96% of the time, there's no record an abuser gave up a gun. In fact, in these 48 counties, there's not a single record of a domestic abuser surrendering a firearm. We shared our findings with Liz Richards of the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women.
Clearly points to a gap.
How big a gap? Minnesota's Supreme Court refuses to release records that would allow KARE 11 to determine exactly how many of those cases involve allegations abusers had a firearm. But we found case after case where guns are mentioned, but no affidavit of transfer filed.
These are cases where we think the court should be taking action.
All rise. Superior Court is now in session.
In King County, Washington courtrooms, they are taking action.
Allegation that you had a weapon in your waistband.
Prosecutors and police formed a task force last year, specifically targeting the guns of accused domestic abusers. With social media, various databases, and most importantly, victim information.
The petitioner indicated that he twice threatened to kill her with a gun, pointed it at her and cocked it.
They identify firearms abusers may not admit to owning.
God is my witness, I don't have it, ma'am.
Using search warrants and other tactics, they've quadrupled the number of guns seized from abusers.
A year ago, none of these guns would have been recovered.
Closer to home in Wisconsin, courts hold a compliance hearing 7 days after the gun surrender order is issued to make sure it happens.
Without requiring people to come in and prove that they're following it, you can't just assume that they're doing it.
David Kack is a former court commissioner in Wisconsin who helped craft the state's protocol. He's now with the Battered Women's Justice Project and regularly travels to Minnesota,
working with Hennepin County right now on their firearm surrender protocol
to help design a similar pilot program here.
Needs to be done before there's a tragedy.
There's no shortage of tragedy. The Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women's annual femicide report shows in the last 5 years, at least 20% of the domestic violence gun-related homicides were by someone prohibited from possessing a firearm. Example, John Plavel, who killed his ex-girlfriend, Julie Hildreth, with a hunting rifle.
First and foremost, it's a safety issue for victims of domestic violence.
Hennepin County presiding family court judge Patrick Robin concedes Minnesota courts need to do better at ensuring compliance with gun transfer orders.
We can do more in making sure that that is a meaningful order and not just a piece of paper.
A piece of paper that, when enforced, could prevent domestic abuse victims like Desiree from becoming the next statistic.
They should take more initiative into making sure that men like this or abusers like this don't have access to weapons.
Well, today I heard from both the governor's office and a state lawmaker who labeled what we found extremely troubling. Now comes the tough job of wrestling with how to fix it. Is it new laws or better enabling the courts to follow up on the law that is already on the books? That remains to be seen. Meanwhile, if you're the victim of domestic violence, there is help available on your screen, the number for the Minnesota Day One crisis line.
You are getting some people to pay attention, which is a good thing.
People are starting to pay attention. I'm hearing from around the state that a lot of folks are looking at this and looking at how they can do better with the courts in their communities.
That's great. Thank you, AJ. Yep.